Lord Chaitanya. But we're going to begin with some kirtan first. Namo Vishnupadaya Vishnupadaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namo Vishnupadaya Vishnupadaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravamani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanyavari Vastatya Rishadarine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravamani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanyavadi Vastatya Rishadarine Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Shri Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Gaura Premi. So once again, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We'll begin with our prayers. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnanana Shalakaya Chakshurtam Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Prakatamahya Tatsvatantikam Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Vishesha Shrinivari Pastrati. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to serve by trying to present an overview on the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. This is a book by Srila Prabhupada based on the biography of Lord Chaitanya called the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and I pray for all your blessings to do justice to this class today, which is on the 12th chapter of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya called the devotee. We discussed the first half of this chapter last week, and we're continuing this week the second half. And we will start with the invocation, which is the 18th verse, the first chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. The translation is: Glory to Sri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Sri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So last week we had concluded with Lord Chaitanya's descriptions of devotional service and how one's goal in devotional service is to come to the constant remembrance of Krishna. And when one is in such remembrance, there are no rules and regulations. But this remembrance is a very elevated stage that one comes through after perfecting the stages that come before remembrance. So we know that in the 9 processes, 9 limbs of bhakti, we start with Shravanam, Kirtanam, and then is Vishnu Smaranam. So in the process of perfecting the Shravanam, which is the hearing, and Kirtanam, which is the chanting, before we get to the Smaranam, which is the remembering, there are rules and regulations. And that is what this part of the chapter is this week. So these rules and regulations are very essential, but they're not dry, because right from the beginning of Krishna consciousness, even when one is in the stage of rules and regulations, the service of Krishna is always full of joy and is always executed with relish. Everybody who comes to Krishna consciousness experiences that enthusiasm, that excitement, that taste. Otherwise, nobody would join. And over time, sometimes we get a little bit jaded, but the taste is always there. It comes up from time to time, and it increases the more one engages in these rules and regulations with sincerity, because these are set down by Lord Chaitanya out of his kindness and mercy, given to us through his teachings to Sanatana Goswami, as we're going through here, to Rupa Goswami, to others who he trained, because he wanted us to be able to reach the stage of Madhurya Bhakti. He was giving us something precious, something that has never been given before. This is the highest stage of Bhakti. Madhurya Bhakti is the stage of conjugal love with Radha and Krishna and the gopis, between Radha, Krishna and the gopis. And if one has that desire, and it is one's constitution to develop that relationship, these rules and regulations will be able to take one there to that eventually, which is something that cannot be given by any other process. This is Lord Chaitanya's special mercy to us in this age. So through the process of the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness, which is sadhana bhakti, we get to the point of raganuga bhakti, which is that spontaneous love, where we're qualified to think of Krishna and to serve Krishna without the rules and regulations necessarily. So let's begin with a discussion of the 64 items of devotional service. However, one should generally accept the following principles to properly execute devotional service. The devotee should: 1. Take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. 2. Receive initiation from the spiritual master. 3. Serve the spiritual master. 4. Inquire and learn love from the spiritual master. 5. Follow in the footsteps of holy persons devoted to the transcendental loving service of the Lord. 6. Be prepared to give up all kinds of enjoyment and suffer all kinds of miseries for the satisfaction of Krishna. 7. Live in a place where Krishna had his pastimes. 8. Be satisfied by whatever is sent by Krishna for the maintenance of the body, and not hanker for more than that. 9. Observe fasting on Ekadasi day. And 10. Show respect to devotees, cows, and sacred trees like the banyan tree. It is essential for a neophyte who is beginning to follow the path of devotional service to observe these 10 principles. So we'll make some notes on these points. So one of the most striking things to note is the importance of the spiritual master. Amongst these 10 principles, the first 4 are solely about the spiritual master. Hearing, taking shelter, inquiring, learning, taking shelter, receiving initiation, serving the spiritual master. So this shows how important it is that one receives guidance in spiritual life. Spiritual life is not something that we can just make up as we go along. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set the example by taking initiation from a spiritual master and giving initiation to disciples. So we take the shelter of the spiritual master to make progress, and through these methods, receiving initiation, serving the spiritual master, inquiring, and learning from the spiritual master, we're able to advance progressively in spiritual life. And then what is also important to notice that point 5 is to follow in the footsteps of devotees. So basically, the first 5 principles are all about the association of learning from, serving, and inquiring from devotees, in particular the spiritual master. But we can consider that this is how essential the association of and learning from and serving devotees are. This is a point that we've been emphasizing on quite a bit in the last few weeks. So another note that we'll make is something which scares people generally from the path of spirituality is point 6, being prepared to give up all kinds of enjoyment and suffer all kinds of miseries for the satisfaction of Krishna. So what this means is that not everybody who takes the spiritual path is going to be suffering perpetually. It doesn't mean that one is being warned that the spiritual path is going to be full of miseries. We've already said that it's actually bliss. We have some relish even when we're in the neophyte stages, and that increases as we make advancement. The point is that the material misery is always going to be there. Srila Prabhupada explained that just as one doesn't need to ask for distress, it just comes. One doesn't need to ask for happiness either. Both of them are due to the living entity based on their karma. But when these miseries come, we tolerate them to show Krishna that we are able to deal with whatever sufferings there are and still continue our services to him and still continue our remembrance of him. Because if we're distracted by these miseries and the material world is full of them, then we'll never develop that full consciousness, that full remembrance, which is our goal in this spiritual life. So with this advancement that we make through these principles, through these items that we are being taught by Lord Chaitanya today, we can make the kind of advancement where we'll be able to tolerate all kinds of sufferings that come our way. Because just like we find happiness is often felt to be very short-lived, so are the sufferings. It's just that it feels like it's not ending or that it's too much to bear. But everything in the material world is like that. It does come to an end. The 11th principle is to try to avoid offenses in serving the Lord and in chanting his holy names. So in this 11th principle of avoiding offenses to the Lord and his service, we are elaborating on the 10 kinds of offenses in the matter of chanting the holy name. 1, to blaspheme a devotee of the Lord. 2, to consider the Lord and the demigods on the same level, or to think there are many gods. That means many gods on the same level as Krishna. 3, to neglect the orders of the spiritual master. 4, to minimize the authority of the scriptures, the Vedas. 5, to interpret the holy names of God. 6, to commit sins on the strength of chanting. 7, to instruct the glories of the Lord's names to the unfaithful. 8, to compare the chanting of the holy names to material piety. 9, to be inattentive while chanting the holy name. And 10, to remain attached to material things in spite of chanting the holy names. These 10 offenses against the holy name should be avoided. So we'll note that this list is a little different from the one that we usually recite every morning before chanting. It's important that we recite the 10 offenses so that we can be aware of them to avoid them. So in this list, inattention is mentioned as one of the items, whereas the list that we usually recite daily, which is given from the Padma Purana, that list has the inattention as the 11th point to note. So either way, we should always be aware that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has said that inattention is the root of all the other offenses. So if we make the effort and chant the holy names with as much attention as we can in the times that favor chanting, like in the early hours of the morning when it's quiet and the mind is more quiet, we'll find that it's easier to avoid all these other offenses as well. The 12th principle in the execution of devotional service is that one should avoid the association of unholy non-devotees. So this we've discussed quite a bit last week. 13 is one should not attempt to have many disciples. So this, of course, is related to those who are initiating spiritual masters. 14, one should not take the trouble to understand many books or to understand partially any particular book, and one should avoid discussing different doctrines. So this, of course, is in the theme of accumulation. In the same way one used to see accumulates material possessions, then we should not try to accumulate knowledge. Knowledge should be gained for the execution of our devotional service. But if we waste too much of time in this study, in the sort of material way of just accumulating it, maybe showing it off and things like that, it's not encouraged. It's atyahara, is described by Srila Rupa Goswami in Nectar of Instruction. It's actually an impediment to our devotional service. Also very important is that we shouldn't partially understand any book, because we understand that a little bit of knowledge is often a dangerous thing. We should try and understand the subject in the course of our devotional service as best as possible. 15, one should be equipoised both in gain and loss. 16, one should not be subject to any kind of lamentation. 17, one should not disrespect the demigods or other scriptures. So this is also important. Just because we are not worshipping the demigods, like a lot of people may do for material gain, it doesn't mean that we disrespect the demigods. And in the same way that we were discussing, people draw different kinds of conclusions from the Vedic scriptures and other scriptures that are corollaries to the Vedas. We don't disrespect these scriptures, as we don't disrespect the worshippers either. We actually, a Vaishnava Sripaka describes always a gentleman or a gentlewoman, and always has the best behavior towards all persons. 18, one should not tolerate blasphemy against the Supreme Lord or his devotees. 19, one should avoid ordinary topics of novels and fiction, but there's no injunction that one should avoid hearing ordinary news. So, of course, the ordinary news can be useful when it's alerting us, for example, to some danger. If there's bad weather, of course, one should become aware of it through the news and things like that. But Shubha would always caution that one, just as much as one should not be reading too much of mundane literature, we shouldn't be too absorbed in newspapers and other periodicals, because eventually it's less about the news and more about the gossip. So we should try to restrict ourselves to just the essential items that will be useful to our Krishna consciousness. 20, one should not give any trouble to any living creature, even a small bug. The first 10 of the 20 items mentioned above are affirmative, and the second 10 are prohibitive. So what this means is that the first 10 are the do's. So generally the do's are given first, the things that we should do in Krishna consciousness. And the reason is that by the acts, the positive acts or the affirmations, we get the strength for the do-nots. Through the positive activities like serving the spiritual master and getting guidance from him, for example, taking association with the devotees, following Ekadasi, and respecting Tulsi and other holy plants, all the list of do's that we had in the beginning, the first 10. These items give us spiritual strength, they give us spiritual understanding, they give us the ability that we're able to then not do these 10 prohibitive things. We're able to avoid association with non-devotees. We're able to avoid undesirable reading materials like that. So this is why the emphasis is always on the acts of Krishna consciousness that we should perform, because by performing those acts, then we're able to get the ability to avoid the things that we're not supposed to do. So the do's are generally given first, and then the do-nots. In addition to these 20, there are about 35 more items of devotional service, and they can be analyzed as follows. 1, hearing about the Lord. 2, chanting about him. 3, remembering him. 4, worshipping him. 5, praying to him. 6, serving him. 7, engaging as his servitor. 8, being friendly toward him. And 9, offering everything to him. So what we recognize is that these are the 9 limbs, the 9 processes of devotional service. These are the 9 ways that scripture gives that we can relate to Krishna. And many of, or all of our devotional activities will fall under these in different ways. So we see that by engaging in the spiritual acts of the do's, the first 10, that give us the strength to avoid the next 10, then we get the ability to serve Krishna directly. we get the qualification and ability to hear, to chant, to remember, to worship, and so on. So all these items are fairly essential, the first 20. And when we come to these 9, we may not be able to perform all, but we must, of course, place emphasis on the hearing and the chanting, which, of course, lead to the remembrance. And then when it comes to the other items, we can perform some or one or all of them as allows, because we know that the examples from Scripture show that even if we perfect one of these items, we'll come to some of the examples of the devotees who were able to do that. Like, for example, Parasevanam is always described as Lakshmi Devi. By perfecting even one, we can actually get pure devotional service with the Lord. Now we come to the points that explain the etiquette or the behavior of the devotee in the temple and at spiritual events. So we've just discussed these 9 processes. We come to 10, dancing before the deity. 11, singing before the deity. 12, informing the deity of one's thoughts. 13, offering obeisances to the deity. 14, standing up to show respect to the deity and the devotees. 15, following a devotee when he gets up to the door. 16, entering the temple of the Lord. 17, circumambulating the temple of the Lord. 18, reciting prayers to the Lord. 19, vibrating hymns in his honor. 20, performing Sankirtan or congregational chanting of the holy name. 21, smelling the incense and flowers offered to the deity. 22, accepting prasadam, food offered to Krishna. 23, attending the arati ceremony. 24, seeing the deity. 25, offering palatable foodstuffs to the Lord. 26 is meditating on the Lord. 27, offering water to the tulsi tree. 28, offering respect to the Vaishnavas or advanced devotees. 29, living in Mathura or Vrindavan. 30, understanding Srimad Bhagavatam. 31, trying one's utmost to attain Krishna. 32, expecting the mercy of Krishna. 33, joining with devotees in performing Krishna's ceremonial functions. 34, surrendering to the Lord in all respects. 35, observing different ceremonial functions and vows. So as we can see, a list sometimes seems daunting when one mentions how many items there are, but these are all items that are very possible to do. In fact, it is items that we do all the time when we're at the temple, when we're associating with devotees. So they're not difficult. But we know now that there's obviously a spiritual basis to it. So we perform it to the best of our ability for the pleasure of the Lord and the devotees. So an important point, of course, is number 29, which Sri Prabhupada has often clarified for us, which is living in Mathura, Vrindavan. So the temple is, of course, just as good as a holy place. So any temple of the Lord is as good as Vrindavan and Mathura, Navadvip, and so on. And if we turn our homes into temples of the Lord by the activities of devotional service, so if we are hearing the scripture, if we are chanting, if we are offering our food as prasadam and distributing it, of course, to our family members or to anyone else as possible, these what seem simple acts but very fundamental acts of devotional service will turn any home into a temple. This is how we can live in Vrindavan, Mathura, Mayapur, or Puri perpetually, even if we're not geographically there. To these 35 items, I added another 4. 1, marking one's body with sandalwood pulp to show that one is a Vaishnava. 2, painting one's body with the holy names of the Lord. 3, covering one's body with the remnants of the deity's coverings. 4, sipping charanamrit, the water that has washed the deity. So Sri Prabhupada placed emphasis, of course, that we must always mark the body with tilak, and we mark the body as well with the names of the Lord where possible. So this is often done with chandan or it's done with chandan as well. Sandalwood paste with the little stamps. So those aren't usually available in other parts of the world. So where they are, most often in India, the devotees will place the names of the Lord with these stamps on their forehead. Usually the names of the Lord are the Lord, so we'll place them in a reverential place like the head and not in the lower body. So this is not, it's not something that has to be done all the time. One can do it if one has the facilities. But the important thing is that one always marks the body with tilak, and of course chants the names of the Lord correspondingly with those tilak markings. That's very important for Vaishnavas. Then if one is fortunate enough to get the remnants of deity's covering, so that means that the clothes that the Lord has worn in his deity form, so one can actually utilize those clothing on one's body as well. But often devotees may turn it into something like a pita because it may be quite decorated. But it's also fine to worship those items because those items are coming from Krishna. It's actually considered to be Krishna. And of course, sipping charanamrit is very important as well whenever one goes to the temple. These 4 additional items make 39 items for devotional service in all. And out of all of these, the following 5 are the most important. So this is the emphasis now. 1 is to associate with devotees. 2 is to chant the holy name of the Lord. 3, to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. 4, to live in a holy place such as Mathura or Vrindavan. And 5, to serve the deity with great devotion. These items are especially mentioned by Rupa Goswami in his book Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. The 39 items above, plus these 5 items, total of 44 items. Added to these, the 20 preliminary items. Add to these the 20 preliminary items, and there are a total of 64 items for conducting devotional service. The devotional service of one who adopts these 64 items with his body, mind, and senses gradually becomes pure. Some of the items are completely distinct from others, some are identical, and others appear to be mixed. So, of course, the comment here is that Srimad Bhagavatam, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, chanting, those are, and living in a holy place, those are actually mentioned twice. But those are obviously for emphasis. Whenever something is repeated, like we hear from that famous verse, Harinam, Harinam, Harinam Kevalam, 3 times for emphasis that the holy name is the holy name, holy name, holy name. Is the only way, the only way, the only way. Nasteva, Nasteva, Nasteva. So in the same way, when something is repeated, it's not a mistake, but it's there for us to understand the importance. So these 5 items, if nothing else that one is able to do, will guarantee pure devotional service. So we used to remember them as the ABCDs. A is for association, devotees. B is Bhagavatam, hearing the Bhagavatam. C is chanting the holy names. D is the deity, and then E, of course, would be, okay, we used to say immigration, but the point is to remember that it is the holy name of the living in a holy place, which, of course, one's home is considered the same. So, as we said from the beginning, under the guidance of the spiritual master, we execute these 5 processes and we're able to actually attain pure devotional service very easily. Srila Rupa Goswami has recommended that one live in the association of those who are of the same mentality. Therefore, it is necessary to form some association for Krishna consciousness and live together for the cultivation of knowledge of Krishna and devotional service. The most important item for living in that association is a mutual understanding of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. Where faith and devotion are developed, they become transformed into the worship of the deity, chanting of the holy name, and living in a holy place like Mathura and Vrindavan. We see in this paragraph, Srila Prabhupada has brought together so nicely the fundamental concepts that we've been discussing in the last few weeks. So what he's saying is that we must be in association of devotees, but he clarifies what it means, because sometimes we may not understand how we can define the association that's for us. Because Srila Prabhupada created ISKCON to provide devotee association, but here he's saying that amongst all the devotees, if we find those who have the same understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, so this is our criterion. Those who we can discuss scripture with, who we're comfortable with discussing scripture with, who we learn scripture from, who we can get realizations, share realizations like that. In the association of such persons, we're able to make the advancement we were discussing previously. We're able to make our faith strong. We're able to develop their good qualities. We're able to get rid of our bad qualities. And this is how we make our way through the stages of devotional service. But Srila Prabhupada is also saying that through this, we're able to also perform the other items of devotional service. So these ABCDs, through the association, and through our discussions on the Srimad Bhagavatam, we're able to chant the holy name better, we're able to serve the deity better, and of course, such an environment automatically becomes like Vrindavan or Mathura. So this is how these concepts tie together so nicely. The last 5 items mentioned after the first 39 are very important and essential. If one can simply discharge these 5 items, he can be elevated to the highest perfectional stage, even if he does not execute them perfectly. So the important thing is the sincerity, not so much the perfection. One may be able to perform one item or many items according to one's capacity, but it is the principal factor of complete attachment to devotional service that makes one advance on the path. So what's the important thing here is being highlighted is the attitude of the practitioner. Sometimes we can't perform an item of devotional service, but it doesn't mean that we get belligerent towards that item. So, for example, if one can't live in a holy place, it doesn't mean that one gets the attitude of, oh, who needs to live in the holy place? It's probably not suitable anyway, and may start blaspheming it and that kind of thing. So we can adapt that kind of thinking to whatever other item one is not able to do. If one is not able to perform an item, it doesn't mean that we disrespect that item or we minimize its importance. We can aspire for it, we can meditate on it, we can respect it and hope and pray for it. But as long as we perform the other items that we can do sincerely, Krishna recognizes that and gives us the ability to not only perform what we can properly, but also gives us the ability to eventually perform what we can't, and certainly gives us the ability to avoid the things that we're supposed to avoid. So it all depends on our attitude. If we're sincere about wanting to avoid something as well, Krishna will give us that ability in time. But we shouldn't, if we can't, for example, avoid something that we shouldn't think that it's okay under the circumstances. We shouldn't basically excuse it in different ways. So our attitude must always be sincerity. Some devotees in history, like Maharaj Ambrish, attained perfection in devotional service by executing all the items of devotional service, while many others attained perfection by discharging the duties of only one item. Some of them are Maharaj Parikshit, who was liberated and fully perfected simply by hearing; Shukadev Goswami, who became liberated and attained perfection in devotional service simply by chanting; Prahlad Maharaj, who attained perfection by remembering; Lakshmi, who attained perfection by serving the lotus feet of the Lord; King Prithu, who attained perfection simply by worshipping; Akrura, who attained perfection simply by praying; Hanuman, who attained perfection simply by becoming the servant of the Lord, or servant of Lord Ram; Arjun, who attained perfection simply by being a friend of Krishna's; and Bali Maharaj, who attained perfection simply by offering whatever he had in his possessions. As mentioned above, Maharaj Ambrish performed all the items of devotional service. He first of all engaged his mind by fixing it on the lotus feet of Krishna, engaged his words, his power of speaking and describing the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He engaged his hands in washing the temple of the deity, his ears in hearing the words of Krishna, and his eyes in beholding the deity. He engaged his sense of touch by rendering service to the devotees, and he engaged his sense of smell by relishing the fragrance of the flowers offered to Krishna. He engaged his tongue in tasting the tulasi leaves offered to the lotus feet of Krishna, his legs in going to the temple of Krishna, and his head in offering obeisances to the deity of Krishna. Because all his desires and ambitions were thus engaged in the devotional service of Krishna, Maharaj Ambrish is considered the leader in discharging devotional service in all kinds of ways. So this is what we call practical devotional service. So last week we encountered this term, and it was explained very nicely that practical devotional service is where one engages devotional service with all one's senses, and one does it in order to awake the dormant devotional service within the heart under the guidance of the spiritual master. So we see that all the principles are tying up in that way, because we start all these items with the first 4 items serving the spiritual master. And the aim is that we develop from these broad principles, we narrow down to that dormant relationship within our hearts. So what we mean by this is that each one of us has a unique relationship with Krishna. And that relationship would be defined by maybe some of these activities. So when we say relationship, we of course are referring to the 5 relationships that are primary in the service of Krishna: servitude, friendship, parental, parenthood, conjugal love, and servitorship. So each one of us has one unique relationship, but because we've been covered by so many layers of material conditioning. We can't remember nor act, of course, according to that relationship. In the process of devotional service, the process of all these rules and regulations is to try and uncover us from all of this contamination and bring us to the point where we can understand what that relationship is and act accordingly. So in this practical devotional service, we have these broad definitions and we execute them under the guidance of our spiritual master, who can, of course, give us directions according to what is practical and what we're able to do. And so we get the right kind of guidance to progress using all our senses as much as possible. And slowly, as we make advancement through the levels of devotional service, then we come to Asakti Bhava Prema, and we start to see and understand what that relationship is with Krishna, and we act according to that relationship. So we can take this term practical to mean it's a practice. Eventually, we get to the point where we're engaging directly in service to Krishna according to our original nature and relationship with him. And it's practical also. Whatever Maharaj Ambrish is doing is not anything out of the ordinary. He's using his hands and legs and eyes in the way that any materialist may do, but he's using it in the service of Krishna. Instead of seeing something mundane, he's seeing the form of Krishna. Instead of speaking about material topics, he's speaking about Krishna. So it's very easy for anybody to do. Everything just needs to be done for Krishna. It's not actually anything out of the ordinary. And of course, that is why some people find it difficult to appreciate, because it seems so ordinary, whereas it's giving us the highest goal. Whoever engages in the devotional service of the Lord in full Krishna consciousness becomes freed of all debts to the sages, demigods, and forefathers, to whom everyone is generally indebted. This is confirmed in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 5, Text 41. Whoever fully engages himself in the service of the Lord, O King, giving up all other duties, is no longer indebted to the demigods, sages, other living entities, his relatives, the forefathers, or any man. So it's quite opposite to the thinking in the material world today. The modern day thinking is that everybody owes us something and we owe nothing to anyone. It's very, very selfish mentality of thinking. But the reality is that as soon as one is born, one owes debts to many different personalities, from the ancestors and our parents to the demigods and other living entities. But someone who is engaging in this practical devotional service like Maharaj Ambrish, dovetailing all his activities to Krishna sincerely, remember, that's the important thing, even if it's not perfectly, but sincerely. They don't owe debts to anybody because everyone else is being benefited by their devotional service. The ancestors are being liberated. The family members of such a person are benefiting spiritually as well. Other living entities that they come in contact with, that they preach to, are being benefited. The demigods are so pleased by seeing their engagements in devotional service as it's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So in this way, such a person doesn't owe debts to anyone. It should be carefully noted, however, that when a person gives up all other duties and simply takes to the transcendental service of Krishna, he has no material desire and is not apt to perform sinful activities. So basically, if somebody is engaging everything, thinking of Krishna, doing everything for Krishna all the time, it's unlikely they're going to do anything sinful because of their full consciousness of Krishna. But if someone does perform sinful activities, not willfully, but by chance, so inadvertently, Krishna gives him all protection. It's not necessary for him to purify himself by any other method, and this is confirmed in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 5, Text 42, which says that a devotee is fully engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord is protected by the Supreme Person. But in case such a devotee unintentionally commits some sinful activity or is obliged to act sinfully under certain circumstances, God, situated within his heart, gives him all protection. So basically, there's no need for anybody. These two verses, these points about owing debts and needing to get purification, is basically saying that no other rituals are needed for somebody who's fully engaged in devotional service. They don't have to engage in these ritualistic performances for paying off these debts, for example, to the forefathers. And if they commit some sinful activity inadvertently, they don't have to undergo any reformatory processes either. Basically, everything that they need to do is just continue engaging in devotional service to pay off these debts, to become purified of any sins that they inadvertently commit. Devotional service is the answer to everything. That's the important point here. The processes of speculative knowledge and renunciation are not chief items for elevation in devotional service. So now we're coming to the necessity for trying to understand spiritual knowledge, spiritual processes, and giving up everything, maybe to live in the temple or renounce and go off to live in isolated places. None of these are necessary either. One does not have to take to the principles of non-violence and sense control. So that means making a separate effort to be sense controlled or to be non-violent, although there are rules and regulations for acquiring these in other processes. Without even practicing these processes, a devotee develops all good qualities simply by discharging devotional service to the Lord. In the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 11:20, canto 11, chapter 20, text 31, the Lord himself says that there is no necessity of cultivating speculative knowledge and renunciation if one is actually engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. So we're returning to this point that sometimes people think in the simplicity of a life, for example, like Maharaj Amrish, would seem simple. He was a king, he was engaging in ordinary activities, but he didn't renounce everything, go off to the forest and get some extraordinary powers through yoga. He didn't sit and become a Muni by understanding all kinds of spiritual processes and developing his own theory about God and the living entity and liberation and so on. But through the seemingly ordinary activities of devotional service, he was able to attain the highest goals, pure love for Krishna. So the emphasis over and over again is that we don't have to make a separate effort by any other means. Somebody who is engaging in devotional service is able to develop actually these qualities. Somebody becomes renounced by the process of devotional service. One gets knowledge by Krishna within the heart through devotional service. One develops all the good qualities of the demigods by devotional service. There's no separate effort that is needed. And there's a wonderful verse from Srimad Bhagavatam to sum that up. Canto 1, chapter 2, text 7. Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Jnaniyati Ashvairagyam Jnanam Shayad Ahoitakam. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. That is very clear. Anyone who thinks that the devotional processes mean that someone engaging in service is lacking in any way, this verse is the answer. And in the same way that one doesn't need to separately cultivate knowledge and renunciation in the path of devotional service, one also doesn't need knowledge and renunciation to come to devotional service. Out of sheer misunderstanding, some transcendentalists think that knowledge and renunciation are necessary for rising to the platform of devotional service. This is not so. The cultivation of knowledge and the renunciation of fruitive activities may be necessary for understanding one's spiritual existence in relation to the material concept of life, but they are not part and parcel of devotional service. So what Sri Prabhupada is clarifying here is that somebody may need to go through getting the process of knowledge and becoming renounced when one is trying to get the basics of spiritual life understood. So that is the person coming to the understanding that they are the soul, that they're not the body is temporary, this material world is temporary, and so on. So people engage in the study of spiritual life, and they become renounced in order to get these concepts right. But somebody who's engaged in devotional service, they get these understandings, they understand these concepts, they practically become renounced on the body and all things related to it by the practice of devotional service. They don't have to make a separate effort. And somebody who is very, very well versed and understood in this, but who is not practicing devotional service, they won't necessarily come to Krishna consciousness because of their knowledge and because of their renunciation. The results of knowledge and fruitive activities are liberation and material sense gratification, respectively. So what that means is these processes of trying to cultivate knowledge and becoming renounced without devotional service, these are all materialistic, actually. So they lead to material goals. One gets liberation into impersonal Brahman, one goes to the heavenly planets, one gets some mystic powers, but it doesn't need devotional service because these are material. They're being performed for material benefit. And bhakti is an item purely spiritual, and as we discussed before, granted by spirit, by Krishna, and by pure devotee. Therefore, that is the results of that is fruitive activity. knowledge and renunciation, cannot be part and parcel of devotional service. Rather, they have no intrinsic value in the discharge of devotional service. One who is freed from bondage to the results of knowledge and fruitive activities can be situated in devotional service. Such a devotee, since a devotee of Lord Krishna is by nature non-violent, and since his mind and senses are controlled, he does not have to make a special effort to acquire the good qualities which result from cultivating knowledge and performing fruitive activities. When Uddhava was questioning Krishna about the rules and regulations according to Vedic injunctions, he asked, why is it that the Vedic hymns encourage one in material enjoyment, while at the same time the Vedic instructions also free one from all illusion and encouragement towards liberation? The Vedic rules are said to be ordained by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but apparently they are contradictions, and Uddhava was anxious to know how one could resolve these contradictions. In reply, Lord Krishna cited the verse mentioned above, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 20, Text 31, informing him of the super excellence of devotional service. For one who is already engaged in devotional service to me and whose mind is fixed on me, it is neither practical nor necessary to cultivate knowledge and renunciation. So basically, we had discussed in previous chapters that when somebody is not inclined to devotional service, the Vedas provides them with other activities to engage them so that they're involved in some spiritual activity and they can make some progress on the spiritual path. But for one who is engaged in devotional service, all these parts mean nothing. It's not necessary, and it's also not at all important for such a person, for someone who's attracted or engaged in devotional service, to make some effort towards them at all. They basically just offer to other persons who are not engaged in devotional service to be involved in some spiritual activities, to get some pious credits, or to advance themselves somewhat. But it's not necessary for anybody who is engaged in devotional service. And thus, the Lord's conclusion is that devotional service is independent of any other processes. So it doesn't need all those processes. Somebody may think, I have to first become realized in knowledge, or I have to first become renounced, and then it will give me access to devotional service, or I can become a better devotee, or then I can become a devotee at all. No, it's not necessary for any of that. The cultivation of knowledge, renunciation, or meditation may be a little helpful in the beginning, but they cannot be considered necessary for discharging devotional service. In other words, devotional service can be discharged independently of the cultivation of knowledge and renunciation. So the importance to understand here is, if we think that we need to have that knowledge first, or we need to be renounced first, it's trying to say that bhakti is actually dependent on these. It's saying that bhakti needs the knowledge or needs the renunciation in order to be cultivated. And we understand that bhakti is independent of anything and everything else. Bhakti, she does not need one to be renounced or needs one to have some amount of speculative knowledge in order to take to it. Bhakti comes from devotees, it comes from Krishna. And so we depend on the mercy of Krishna and the devotees in order to attain. Actually, we attain bhakti more through the mercy of the devotees, because Krishna himself, he's controlled, he's given to us by bhakti. We get it through the mercy of the devotees primarily. In this regard, there is also a verse in the Skanda Purana in which Narada Muni tells a hunter tribesman, "O hunter, the qualifications you have just now acquired, such as non-violence and others, are not astonishing, because one who is engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Lord cannot be a source of trouble for anyone under any circumstance." So in the same way, one doesn't need to make an effort to become knowledgeable. Krishna will give one the knowledge of the heart. He promises us that in Bhagavad Gita. In the same way, one doesn't need to make an effort to be renounced. One can still be engaged in the ordinary household activities, but be renounced from all of it, because they're doing everything for Krishna. They don't have to make a special effort to become non-violent, or to become merciful, or to become kind, or any of the other wonderful qualities that that one needs to have. These qualities also come naturally to one who's engaged in devotional service. So the bottom line of all our discussions today is, by engaging in devotional service sincerely, one gets all these other benefits along the course of one's action. It's not that one is actually performing devotional service for these things. One doesn't perform devotional service to get knowledge, or to get renunciation, or to get good qualities. One performs devotional service to please Krishna. But in the course of performing devotional service, these other qualities they come almost like byproducts. They come along the way. And so a devotee is never short on any of these things, any of the benefits obtained by any processes. Rather, a devotee, by engaging in devotional service, is achieving all of that and more, the most important thing, and that is pure love for Krishna, which frees them from the bondage of this material world and helps them attain what no other path can actually give them, which is service to the Lord in the spiritual world. So thank you all so much for your kind attention. We discussed devotional service with regular rules and regulations this week. So next week in chapter 13, we're going to discuss Raganuga Bhakti, which is spontaneous devotional service to Krishna. So please join us. Srila Prabhupada, Jai, Shri Gaura, Jai. Are there any questions, comments, or clarifications?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the wonderful class.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you for the service.
Maharaj, you mentioned we should listen to Srimad Bhagavatam class. So is there any particular chapter we should start, or do you recommend reading any specific part that will help us in a sort of a quicker way?
So Shri Prabhupada actually...
chapters there.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, you know, if we do it systematically, it doesn't, like, what I did was in the beginning, listen to all Shri Prabhupada's classes on Srimad Bhagavatam that I saw, I think it was on ISKCON Desire Tree, and there were about 300 classes. So if you listen to a class a day, you can actually finish that in a year. So it's just about the consistency, I think. And of course, that's beginning with, from the beginning of Prabhupada's class to the end. But Shri Prabhupada gave, I've heard different devotees describe different things that Shri Prabhupada, of course, says that we should be systematic in studying Srimad Bhagavatam, that we should obviously start from the beginning, because the first 9 cantos qualifies us in order to get to the 10th canto, which is the highest Vedic knowledge, the highest spiritual, highest knowledge of it all is Krishna and his pastimes, particularly his pastimes in Vrindavan, so we can get to the right understanding. But I've also heard devotees quote Shri Prabhupada, where he says that Bhagavatam is like a rasgulla, where if you bite anyway, it's sweet. So, for example, I would say that the way we can apply it is that since we are neophytes and we need to start from the beginning, because it's true, everything in Srimad Bhagavatam is actually relishable. So if you want to get all the knowledge, it's easier to start from the beginning. Then you know that you're starting at 1 and you move to 2 and you don't skip anything in between. Because if you start at 4, and then you go back to 2 and you go to 6 and you may miss 3 in between. It happens in material life. We are conditioned living entities. Then that way we don't miss any of the nectar. But I'd say that if we now are listening to Bhagavatam classes and, you know, someone is giving a class and, for example, they're giving a class from Canto 4 and we've only been up to Canto 2, we're not going to say, well, it's Canto 4, I can't get there yet. You understand? So we hear the Bhagavatam wherever we can and whichever speaker is speaking, whatever verses. But it's nice to do it systematically for us who are neophytes, so that we can get the knowledge systematically. We don't miss anything, and we can get our understanding right, so that when we approach the 10th canto, it's with all of the benefit and the blessings of the 9 cantos before. Is that
yes,
clear?
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you so much. And Maharaj, if you can please share that link that you mentioned about Srila Prabhupada's classes that you heard. If you can share it with us.
Yeah, ISKCON Desire Tree. I'll put it up on the group.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. And that 350 classes covers the whole
Basically,
Bhagavatam.
I think it's not the whole. Prabhupada actually he spoke on like a lot on, for example, Canto 1, but not so much on even Canto 10, for example. So basically, it'll cover all of Prabhupada's lectures. So you know, like everything that Prabhupada said on the Bhagavatam. Obviously, he spoke on the Bhagavatam in other they've got other folders like festivals and stuff like that. So I thought it's like good to start with the Bhagavatam classes and move to the other classes that he gave as well. And we find, though, if you listen, that the themes are all consistent throughout. So even if, for example, Sri Prabhupada didn't speak a lot on a certain canto, but the same themes come up in other classes as well. So you'll have a very good understanding of the whole Bhagavatam by listening to all of these classes, even if they weren't about a specific verse, if that also makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Bhakta Raja Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Any realizations from your side?
Hare Krishna. Mataji, no questions or anything like that on the class. I enjoy these classes. I just wanted to make a comment on something else. The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya is the first book that I bought when I got to the temple, and I read it, and it's really impressed me. So it's always stuck with me. The one thing I just wanted to say, you know, when devotees go to India and when they talk and everything, they always talk about Mathura and Vrindavan and everything. And the parikram that you posting on the group now about Navadvip, I'm really excited about it because it's explaining things. Because I've always wondered to myself, why don't people talk about Navadvip much, you know? They're always talking about Vrindavan. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about it because the same as I started with this book, it's always been a question in my mind why people don't actually talk much about it. So thank you very much for that, Mataji.
It's all the mercy of Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. We're actually discussing it today, actually, Paramahansa Prabhu and I at the program, that we can't get Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan without Lord Chaitanya in Navadvip. Navadvip is the Vrindavan. It's a nice point that the devotee was taking us on Parikram, Taji Balaram Prabhu. He was telling us that Navadvip is the Vrindavan of Kali Yuga. It's identical, but it's more accessible. And it's interesting that you'd say that it's as much as it's more accessible that we don't discuss too much of it. So I'm also excited because we ourselves, like, we were going there like for the second time, my mother for the third time, but we also didn't get so much into the mood in previous parikrams. But this time, you know, we got some special mercy of Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, and we were able to experience a lot more. And also to get a lot of mercy. So we want to share that mercy as much as possible with everyone.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Gaura. Hare Krishna. There's no other questions, comments. Then we will sing a bhajan, a meditation to end the year on how everything is for Krishna, everything is for his service. It's therefore appropriately called Atma Nivedanam, offering everything to Krishna, by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. We owe him so much because he's given us Lord Chaitanya's birthplace amongst everything else extraordinary and wonderful. We would not know its exact location and be able to get the opportunity to go there. And his writings, of course. And this tune I first heard by His Holiness Bhakti Charaswami Maharaj, who used to sing these bhajans so beautifully. Manasa deho geho jogi chumo arpilu duapade nanda kisho manasa deho geho jogi chumo arpilu duapade nanda kisho Sampade Vipade Jivane Marane Dae Mama Gila Tua Opada Baro Sampade Vipade Jivane Marane Dae Mama Gela Tua Opada Baro Maru Vira Kopi जो इच्छा तुआरा नित्य दासा प्रतितु आदिका जन्मा मोए इच्छा जरी तोर भक्ता गृह जनी जन्म हमो गीता जन्म हो जगतु अदास बाहिर्मुखा ब्रह्म जन्मेन भुक्ति मुक्ति स्पृहा विहीना जे भक्ता लभाइते ताको संघ अनुराक्षा जानका जाननी ताइका तनाय प्रभु गुरु पति तू सर्वमय भक्ति विनोद खोए शुनु खाना राधा नाता तू हमारा पराना जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा 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 जय प्रभुपदा गुरुदेव 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 जय गुरुदेव जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय गुरुदेव Shri Gaura Hari ki jai, Shri Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Gurudev ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Shri Gaura Hari Bol. So we read the translation. Mind, body, and family, whatever may be mine, I have surrendered at your lotus feet, O youthful son of Nanda. In good fortune or in bad, in life or at death, all my difficulties have disappeared by choosing these feet of yours as my only shelter. Slay me or protect me as you wish, for you are the master of your eternal servant. If it is your will that I be born again, then may it be in the home of your devotee. May I be born again even as a worm, so long as I may remain your devotee. I have no desire to be born as a Brahma, alas to you. I yearn for the company of that devotee who is completely devoid of all desire for worldly enjoyment or liberation. Father, mother, lover, son, lord, preceptor, and husband, you are everything to me. Thakur Bhaktivinoda says, O Kana, please hear me. O Lord of Radha, you are my life and soul. So this one little point before we end. I never thought of it before, but when we were describing to our very wonderful Vaishnava guide, Daji Balaram Prabhu in Mayapur, and we mentioned the name of our presiding lordship, Sri Sri Radha Radhanath in Chatsworth, Durban. He remarked that it was special that the name of Radha is mentioned twice. Usually in the names of deities, it's either Radha Madhav, Radha Shamsundar, and the name of Radha is mentioned once. And here we have the good fortune of saying her name twice. And we know that Krishna derives the greatest happiness by hearing the beautiful, most holy name of his Radha. So certainly he is very pleased with us every time we chant the names of our beloved deities. So this is our special mercy, Devi. So thank you all so much for your kind attention again. We join us next week and have a wonderful start to the new year full of service to Shri Guru, the Vaishnavas, and Shri Gauranga. Hare Krishna. Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna ji, thank you so much.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Raja Prabhu, for joining. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Damodar Prabhu. Hare Krishna.